Branch selection. Today's video is going to be especially useful to beginning gardeners, but even advanced gardeners might find some use in it as well, because I'm going to be talking about some of the thought processes that I go through when I select branches to remove or branches to keep. So let's look at some examples and talk about the thought processes behind it. Here's a tree. There's a few branches I would like to remove. Starting off with the branches up top, I just want to reduce the height a little bit. And I've got some branches below that I can prune them down to. Ideally, I don't just prune down to a bud, I prune down to a branch, because that way the bud isn't necessarily guaranteed to start growing, whereas the branch is already there, so that's pretty much guaranteed to take over at that point, especially when it's a leader. In this case, in like an apple or a pear, that branch will take over when it's at the top. In an apple or a pear, that hormone that controls the apical dominance is called auxin, which is always going to favor the highest branch. So that's going to be this one in this case if I remove that. We're going to have to talk about this one later. But for now, let's prune it down to that branch right there. Alright, so first we're going to prune this down. Like so. I left a little bit of a stub so that it can heal over properly. Next, I've got to restore the apical dominance. There's a branch that goes up right here. These are all fruiting buds, so I'm going to lose a few of them. But there's plenty more down here. And this will get it all in balance again. Just going to make a cut right there. Just like that, and that gets this all in balance again. I think it's important to mention to not worry too much about making a mistake. Generally, you're not going to make too bad of a cut that you can't just fix next year. So, just make the cut. If you make a mistake, that's okay. Generally, it can be rectified the next year or the year after. Next, I've got a branch that is in a crotch of two branches here, and is also touching the branch above it. So removing this branch will fix both of those issues. Here's another view of it. You can see it's right in the middle there. I don't particularly like that, so I'm just going to remove it, leaving a little bit of a stub, like so. The rest of these branches, I am not too terribly concerned with their placement. Especially the ones that are low hanging in this particular tree, because they protect the trunk from the southern facing sun, which is also hot. And if you have that combination, then you probably want these low hanging branches, because the leaves and everything will shade your trunk, which will absolutely get sun damage if they weren't there. Ideally, you don't have crossing branches like this branch here that crosses with the one below it. The reason why I'm leaving it is because it has fruit buds on it, and I just don't want to lose the fruit buds. But more than likely, depending on what develops back here, I'll prune it shorter to give this some more room to breathe. This right here is my multi-grafted pear, and is a great example, in my opinion, of how I want the branch structure to be. Everything is nicely spaced out. There isn't a lot of overlapping or anything like that. It's pretty much perfect. Everything has its own space that it can grow in, and that is exactly what I want to see. Maybe it's getting a little bit tall, but that can be fairly easily fixed. If I wanted to reduce the height on this, I would probably just reduce it down to one of these other leaders to reduce its height. But it's not unmanageable for me yet, so I'm not even thinking about that yet. Yeah, it's a great example. I really like this tree. I haven't even had to prune it yet. This is my other apple tree, and something I might consider one of these days is to not have this branch and that branch, because they're both essentially growing the same direction, which means they might overshadow one another. Which also just means that this one is probably going to keep getting stronger, and then in turn weakening this one. So that's something that I might consider for next year. I'm going to see how it grows this year, but because I'm really happy with the way that it looks. but that's something that you can think about in future. I've already taken out some of the branches in between. I like to have a node in between each branch. So like this one, I don't want that to be a branch right here, and then that could be a branch again, ideally facing a completely different direction. I've got this side of the tree facing south, and I'm hoping that that'll stimulate this branch here to fill in some of this void over here, because a lot of the branches were always concentrated on that side, because that was always the side that faced south. But I'm hoping that some of these lower ones might take over, because they're still a good height from the bottom. I want there to be a little bit of a gap from the bottom here, but I think this is still pretty reasonable. But in future I might select some of my favorite ones here as well, instead of having all of the branches be here. I don't actually have an example of this, but let's say this branch was down a little further and it was rubbing up against this one. I wouldn't want that either, because that rubbing up against each other, that would cause these branches to get damaged, and that's where pathogens and bacteria and things and also fungus can start becoming a problem. So if there's anything rubbing, like branches rubbing up against each other, you'd want to make a choice between one or the other branch as well. I really like the swooping motion that this branch has. I think that's perfect, especially coming off the main trunk. However, why would you want this little branch to get much thicker in this position? That wouldn't be ideal, especially when it's so close to the main trunk here. So in this situation, it actually just makes more sense to just get rid of this little branch right there. Gonna leave a little bit of a stub so it can heal back properly. Just like that. That makes a lot more sense. Now that energy is gonna just be diverted into this branch instead, rather than that little guy right there. So these are just some of the things that I consider when I select my branches. I don't want my branches to overshadow each other. I don't want my branches to get crossing and start rubbing against each other. So these are just some things to consider. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below and I'll get to them as soon as possible. Thank you for watching. Tot de volgende keer. Thank you for everyone that likes the video, comments on the video, is subscribed to the YouTube channel, and a double thank you if you also share the video around. I truly appreciate it, and that motivates me to keep making more videos.